Perfect. Marcelo, we are live, my friend. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Robbie. Really nice to catch up with you.
Likewise, I think this is definitely the most well-researched episode of this show. And for anybody that is tuning in for the first time, this is Tech Talk in 20. My name is Robbie Martin, where the goal is to bring you easily digestible conversations with thought leaders in the cyber and IT space. And tonight I am privileged to be joined by Mr. Marcelo Carvalho, who I met on LinkedIn, actually. And it was really organic because Marcelo is a cybersecurity executive with 20 plus years of experience, ranging from powerhouses like GE and Capital One, but also most recently, he is a published author around a topic that hits very close to home for me. And his new book, which I encourage everybody to check out, is called How to Beat Burnout with Gratitude, a simple path to identify what really matters. So Marcelo, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit further, and then we'll dig into things.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robbie. Yeah, so I'm originally from Sao Paulo, Brazil, but since I'm early in my career, joined some companies working first in information technology and IT, and then migrated to cyber, and that allowed me to work in super complex problems. It was a privilege to get to know a lot of people that also helped me as mentors, right? But also with that, it came some additional things in life, which it basically led to this book that we're going to be talking about in a second. And this topic is so important and so present right now in our lives.
Mm-hmm. I think what drew me to you, Marcelo, and I told you this when we first talked, was I don't think we see, and if there aren't a ton of executives and upper level management that have experienced burnout, I'm glad to hear that. But I do think there's a large gap in people talking about it and being open about it and being vulnerable about it. We just went through a really unstable 3 years globally, where there was a lot of people who had their life flipped on its head, not just from a quarantine perspective, but from a professional perspective. And it was really true for me. I was already, from a professional perspective, kind of gauging what I wanted to do next and not really having a super deep sense of purpose in the role that I was in. And then COVID happened, and you're really stuck and confronted with those day-to-days. I wake up, I go to the kitchen, I open my laptop, and this is it. I don't know how this is going to last for, but I really know that I don't want to do this forever. And so I was really faced with that reality really harshly. And it began to just wear on me. And nobody wants to talk about depression, or nobody wants to talk about burnout, but it really can manifest it in really physical ways. So when I saw you on LinkedIn talking about this in a position that a lot of people admire and aspire to, I thought it was a really awesome way to show strength through vulnerability. And that's why I had reached out. So again, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me tonight. But I'm curious too, Marcelo, you make some really good points in your book, and it's really well fleshed out. But if you had to describe burnout, how would you put that to somebody that may be unfamiliar?
No, I appreciate that, Robbie. Yeah, so burnout has been defined since, I think, 1970s. It started with, of course, the health professionals in terms of their passion to help people. So doctors, nurses, EMTs, and etc. Right? And more recently, it evolved. So the most simple way I could describe burnout is a complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion. Right? It is a threefold package. It is basically slightly different from stress. Stress is a component of it. Depression can be a factor that contributes to get to a burnout stage, but the burnout stage is really that last drop in the bucket that pushes us to that condition where you cannot get out of the bed, you cannot sustain like any level of confrontation with somebody saying no or somebody criticizing your work, you break down. And then the last piece is really the mental state. Your brain doesn't stop, right? you cannot get out of that loop of worrying and worrying and worrying and worrying. And there are some other things that happen, but like that's to me the simplest way of not only defining, but also make it real, right? How does it feel to have a burnout? And that was the intent of the book, is to really make it real and make it that any, you know, general, you know, professional, right? It doesn't need to be in the healthcare industry. Anyone can have it, and this is what it looks like.
I resonate so much and relate to your description really personally, because I remember when it was probably June of 2021 and my girlfriend was over working from my place and I was pacing around my apartment like a lost puppy. And for context, I give this context not out of arrogance, but just so that everyone understands where I was coming from. I had been a top performer in my role, was hitting all of my incentives, hitting all of my bonuses. I don't want to speak for my past managers, but I think if I asked them, they would give really favorable reviews of the work that I was doing. But behind closed doors, I was just miserable. And my girlfriend looked at me one day, she's like, "Why won't you sit down?" And I looked at her, I was like, "I feel like I'm having a quarter life crisis." And I wasn't about to go out and buy a Corvette. I don't mean things like that, but I had lost that sense of what the heck am I doing here? And I didn't feel like I had something to point to, or if somebody asked me what I did professionally, I had lost that sense of pride in it. And it wasn't until the point where I looked in the mirror and said, "You're dodging phone calls. You're not servicing your accounts the way that people have come to expect." When it really hit home for me, that voice in my head that started saying, "Why are you so lazy? Why aren't you performing the way that you used to?" It wasn't that I had become lazy. It was my body telling me that this is not what you're meant to be doing. You're lacking purpose in this because it isn't your purpose. So the thing started to manifest for me, both mentally and physically. I wasn't sleeping well. I was stressed all the time. I didn't want to do things socially. Not that that was too big of an option during COVID, but all of the things that you laid out were exactly what I was experiencing. And I knew I had to make a change. I kind of got to a breaking point where I was like, I can't keep doing this forever. I don't even know if I can do this another day. So it really followed the exact track that you lay out in your book and in my personal life as well.
No, you nailed, because some of the signs of burnout, right? You mentioned a lack of a sense of purpose, right? You start basically, the imposter syndrome kicks in, saying, "I'm not good enough," right? I cannot, I'm lazy. Why am I not able to achieve this anymore? There are many explanations for that in the stage of burnout. The other one, you have a sense, what we call it, a brain fog, where you cannot think straight anymore. It's almost like you lose your ability to really solve very simple problems. And that is very connected to your comment about avoiding calls, right? Avoiding situations. In that stage, we are so vulnerable that any situation that could remotely expose us to, "I am a fraud," right? "I cannot handle a simple problem," and etc. We start avoiding those things. And that can start to characterize you as, in your mind, as a slacker or a weak person, right? And that's not the situation. And what we normally do for those driven, type of personalities, you just keep pounding, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. And that's another thing that about burnout that people need to realize. Burnout doesn't happen suddenly. It's been there dragging for months and months and months, and you just start piling up the signs of it. But then there is that last drop in the bucket. And from there, and that's why I try to make it really clear by my stories, my personal story in the book, is that after that last drop is downhill, right? To get out of that, it is really, really difficult. And there will be situations where you're going to be spiraling in that state where you cannot sleep, then you cannot get out of bed, your brain going like 100 miles per hour, but then all of a sudden you just want to sit and do nothing, and you become like lethargic. It's almost like you're getting to a state where you don't want to do anything because you're afraid you're gonna do something wrong, you're gonna embarrass someone, you're
Mhm.
gonna let somebody that you love down. Does that resonate with you, Robbie?
Yeah, it definitely does. And especially the last piece, I don't even think that's something we talked about leading up to this, Marcelo, is it was that kind of vicious cycle of you feel crappy about yourself, and then you beat yourself up for feeling crappy about yourself. And it kind of goes in this circle of, well, I've never been one that was an underachiever, but I am. And like, why am I here? And I've never been one that isn't proud to call my folks and tell them what I've been up to, or give them a life update. But the truth is that I'm not. And then it compounds in this kind of vicious way that you get to a point, or at least I did, where I had to resign from my job. And luckily I had a financial standing where I could afford to take some time off. And what ended up happening is I called my manager, and said, look, said a lot of the same things that I told you, Marcelo, and was really nervous of what the reaction back was going to be. And it was surprised, but I understand everything that you're going through, and I get, totally understandable. And I gave them a month notice. I said that I was going to make some introductions, close all of the accounts that I was working on, and then I was going to take November and December off. Because of course his question was, oh, well, where are you headed? And I was like, nowhere. I'm heading back to my apartment. I want to work out. I want to sleep in. I want to take some time to recharge. And I think that surprised him. And I think that surprised anybody I talked to the most, because that was another piece that I just knew, having soul searched for so long, I wasn't ready. And when recruiters had hit me up, they're like, well, why don't you want to start till January? And I was honest. I was like, you are not going to get the Robbie Martin that I want you to have. You're not going to get the person that I'm going to build up in this interview process. And so I was proud of myself for setting that boundary of, I need some time to recover from this. And I think that's a piece that people downplay as well. It's, oh, if I switch jobs, I'm not going to be burnt out. And that is totally treating a symptom and not the cause. And so when they actually came back, they were like, well, if you've made up your decision, you can go ahead and part ways now if you'd like. So I got an extra month off. So I resigned and had October, November, December of 2021 to do whatever I wanted. And I can tell you the first month was not fun. I was anxious. I was like, I need to be doing something with my time. Like, well, you went from feeling lazy with a job, and now you're just lazy without a job. And then probably 3 weeks in, it became, this is what you wanted. And not just this is what you wanted, this is what you needed. And so I totally appreciate the fact that not everybody is in the same situation I was to do that. But if you are, and you're feeling these things and this resonates with you, don't be afraid to take time to yourself, and don't be afraid to push that reset button. The world's going to keep spinning. It's going to be okay. But it does resonate with me very much so. And it took me a while to even forgive myself, I guess you could say, or show kindness to myself for getting to that point. And I think now there's a term for the way that I was feeling. And it didn't exist a year ago when I resigned. And it's this quiet quitting phenomenon, which interesting name. I think it kind of gives the connotation that people are just waiting to be fired, really, to where they're just riding out the job that they have, or doing the bare minimum, and almost waiting for somebody to put them out of their misery. They're like, all right, well, I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to hang on as long as I can, even though I'm miserable. So I'm curious what your take on that phenomenon is.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It's interesting. In one hand, I believe the media is really trying to bring awareness about the burnout topic and etc. Initially, and I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn about that, where my thought is that it's admirable that they are trying to bring awareness about this topic. Initially, when you are connecting that with the Great Resignation, other phenomena or label that's out there, I think it's fine. When you start connecting quiet quitting with burnout, I have some different thoughts about that. I think the term is actually very negative for someone that is on the edge of a burnout or in the middle of it, because you already think you're a slacker. And if you hear that people are coining you that you're quiet quitting, they're basically saying you are a slacker and you are quitting, which in reality, that's not true, right? If you go back to the moment which you described, what you're doing, you're coping with your situation. You are trying to avoid some of the stressors that was basically going to trigger you and kick this, that imposter syndrome, right?
Mhm.
So I like the term quiet coping, which is in a burnout stage, coping is actually very important. Is when you find a way to really cope with the situation for a period of time until you get back to a better state where you don't have brain fog anymore. To your point, you decided to start working out. I don't think I mentioned this to you in our previous conversation, but I realized that vicious circle that you described as well in the middle of my burnout crisis.
Mhm.
And then immediately, I also realized that, you know what, with the help of some health professional, my psychologist back at the time, it was that I need to build a virtual circle. So basically, I actually drew a virtual circle, which was exercising, eating healthy, talking to my psychologist, and those things became like exercise X number of days per week.
Mhm.
Avoid some of these food that are actually triggering the wrong things in your body, right? How you can basically balance. My wife is a nutritionist, so I was,
Hey, well, that's handy.
happy to have somebody in the house to help me with that. And I actually built something that I actually printed and I had, so I could stare every single day, say, this is how I'm going to get out of that. But
Mhm.
that
I think
was like more
habit
of a,
tracking is huge.
exactly. It was like a physical part of the house, but on the mental portion, it was that coping, right? I needed to do some stuff that would get my mind out of that spiral. So I believe the best term for somebody that's going through a burnout and context, everything should be quiet coping, but this is short term. It's not going to take care of real burnout in the long run, because the burnout, you got to that stage because some things led to it. Stress at work is one thing, it's just an external stressor factor. There are some things like underneath, there are the triggers of burnout. So you can think about events that happen in your life, how values that were passed to you, some personal characteristics that you have. You mentioned being like a top performer, always got it there, and et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, not trying to put words in your mouth, is that you feel you lost your identity
Mm-hmm.
in your purpose. And humans, on top of the physical basic needs like shelter, food, and water, and etc., we have our psychological basic needs. And they are basically, in simple terms, three things: feeling loved, feeling capable with a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling part of something. If one of those three things is unbalanced, that is a huge chance the other two get unbalanced as well. So imagine yourself having some things in your life, some events in your life that you already give you a little bit of a putting on the edge on some of these situations, and then you get some long-term stressors like a pandemic, being confined in your house, and etc. It's unfortunately is a bad combination to push
Mm-hmm.
some people to a burnout stage.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And the moment I realized that I had lost that identity, or I think there's also a piece where you might have just shed a previous identity, but you tried to hang on to that, or you tried to stay in it for too long. And shout out Liana Clemens, who was my direct manager at the time. I told her we were having a one-to-one, and I just kind of opened up. I was like, I'm just not confident. Like I felt like somebody in sports who was in a big slump. And she was like, well, of all people, Robbie Martin shouldn't lose confidence. And I thought about it. I was like, it's strange that I lost something to the point where other people's image of me is more positive than mine is of myself. And that's where, looking back on it, I should have done the deep work from that point on to get back to what other people thought of me, in a positive sense. I'm not saying over-index yourself to conform to what other people think, but my point is there was some dissonance between what my external identity was and what it was inside of me. And so I had lost that purpose, and then I had thus hung on to too long to identity that didn't serve me anymore. And it took me pressing that reset button to kind of find that again. I wasn't able to do it while the world was moving a million miles an hour, and I was trying to hang on to a job that wasn't fulfilling anymore. For me personally, I got to a point where I just was not able to fulfill my job duties anymore. So I said, this isn't serving anybody. It's not good for me. It's not good for the business. It's not good for my clients. I need to bow out for a minute, go reset, go find that identity again, go find that purpose. And that's what it took for me. So it definitely resonates, because I think this all stacks on top of each other. The burnout, the lack of purpose, the lack of identity, all can be this perfect storm till you kind of wake up one day and you just look at the ceiling and you're like, this again? Like, what am I doing?
Yeah, no, it's remarkable how much you learn by yourself, right, about this, because some key things is that you hit right there in the head on the nail, is that pause is crucial. Admit that you need help and seek help is the second thing that it's crucial to get better. And then it goes back to your point about the identity. I went through the exact same situation. And that's what I try to describe a little bit in the book, is that how do you do that? How do you find your identity? To be candid with you, I did not even know I had an identity until I hit the rock bottom. I didn't spend time thinking about what was my identity. So I had to then create a framework on how do I reestablish, or how do I rediscover what is my essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have something that is native, that we were born with, that since we were young, we demonstrated. That thing will never go away. And so I use those childhood critical events to really understand who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
And through going back to those moments, I was like, okay, I reacted this way in that tough moment. And then I valued that moment with my family that was like really close to my heart, right? And I was like, okay, I valued that, and I managed that way. And that's basically how I managed to get out of the burnout. And breaking news, I had to do it twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know that I had 2 episodes of burnout.
Yeah.
And I really call them learning opportunities. I wouldn't say I am happy that I had burnout. Of course, I'll not say this, that, but I'm grateful because it allowed me to learn. The first episode of burnout that I had, what I learned was about coping mechanism, right? That was what I learned. And I built a set of tools that were basically for allow me to understand I'm getting close again, I'm getting close again, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting close again. What can I quickly do to push this away and not get there? So I learned those. What I did not learn in the first episode was what drove me to that situation, right? My personal characteristics. Why am I having this? So in order to learn, I had a second time in 2020. That is the moment that I said, you know what? I'm going to figure out why. I was looking for the why. And through a support network, health professional, my family, and that support network is crucial to really figure out why you end up there. right? So my wife is a trooper. I owe her my life, to be candid with you. My family, my siblings, and my psychologist. After I had the second time, I was like, I need to figure it out. How I figured it out, I went back to find my identity from my childhood moments. The next thing that I did after that, and I think it's important for us to understand, is that as soon as you know who you are, you know what you value the most, right? What are the things, like the simple things that really matter to you, right? And then if you hone into those things, you basically remove the noise. Did that resonate to you, Robbie?
Yeah, I think that for me it does. And it also reminds me of when I'd be having conversations with friends that whether they were a young adult that were within, say, 5 or 6 years of starting their career, and they felt like they lost themselves a little bit, or were taking a look in the mirror and were like, is this it? Like, am I just going to be this corporate drone for the rest of my life? Like, what makes me me? And for me personally, it's always been martial arts to some extent. I've wrestled pretty much my whole life, and I still now, as almost a 30-year-old man, compete in jiu-jitsu tournaments and wrestle and box, and I have to have those things. I realized that even though I started doing that in 5th grade, that's stuck with me as kind of a core tenet or a core hobby that I draw some of my kind of bedrock from, because I like to know what my body's capable of. So if I don't have that aspect of it, I do lose a little bit of meaning in some other things. And so when friends ask me, I would always say, what did you like to do when you were a kid? Was it painting? Was it hiking? Was it spending time with family? Was it writing poetry? I think a lot of people abandon those things as kind of childhood hobbies. You always think of having a diary and the little boy or girl's bedside table where they talk about their crushes, and you'd lose the benefit of journaling as an adult and getting these thoughts out of your head and putting them on paper. So that's actually one of the biggest advice I ever give to friends if they ask me how to find that identity or how to reconnect with themselves, is go back to the time where you felt most connected with yourself, or the time you were going through the most self-discovery. And that was adolescence, when you were figuring out what your body was capable of, what it was made of. How did you feel around people? Were you an introvert? Were you an extrovert? What filled your cup up? What drained it? So if you revisit some of those things, I think a lot of people would be surprised that as much as you've changed as you've grown older, a lot of those really core bedrock foundational aspects are the same. And you can re-tap into those when you're trying to recraft that identity.
Yeah, you're spot on. That's why I have some activities, I would say, for the reader in the book. You may recall that I would say, go back to a moment where you felt really proud of yourself.
Yeah.
Go back to a moment where you felt really capable, and in a moment that you felt really loved. And how did that make you feel? Right? Again, I'm going back to the 3 basics of human psychological needs, right? And from there, everyone has those moments. And as soon as you figure that out, you're like, okay, I know what matters to me. So now, from everything that's going on in my life, let's figure out, what do I really want? What do I need? What do I have? And who I am, right? If you start that exercise with what you want and what you need, like 2 separate columns, very likely your one column is way bigger than what is your need column. Sorry. As you reflect a little bit more and you add one more, which is like, what do you have? That third column is going to be, in your initial look, is going to be the smaller column. But as you reflect in your identity, identifying what really matters, and etc., you start looking at those 3 columns, you're like, that's not right. You start either scratching some things because no longer has the value that you originally saw. That's why in the book I mentioned, do it the first column first, sit on it for a couple of days. Then you come back. And then you start scratching and moving things around. And at the end of this, you're going to have basically like, okay, I now know what I really, really need is like, there's this tiny bit right here. What I really, really want, in theory, should be just a little bit above of that, right? But what you have, the column grew so much because you're connecting the halves with what you really need. And then comes the final column, which is who you are. The I am column that I mentioned is that ties everything together, right? So I am strong because I navigate through all of this. And those characteristics of the M is what you have to hone in going forward to achieve the remaining needs that you probably are not in the have column. In your want column is going to be like shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. At that point, the last piece of the puzzle is the gratitude for the things that you already have that really matter and for who you are. At that stage, all the noise that society imposes on you, that values that were given to you when you were young, or self-imposed, high bars, they become noise. So the stressors associated with that, you have a lower effect on you, right? And you can just keep honing into that. Is that almost like a shifting of perspective by going through this discovery of your identity, a discovery what really matters to you, and how grateful you are for the things that you already have there are really meaningful.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think they're all beautiful points, and I think that they're really easily actionable. I don't think that the first step is easy, but when you break things down the way that you have and the way that you do in your book, it really does just become a matter of taking that first step and putting in those initial steps to reconnect with yourself, reconnect with your purpose, reconnect with your identity, and not getting caught up in, again, the societal pressures or the self-imposed pressures that got you to the point where you are. Anyway, so Marcelo, I think they're awesome points. I think this has been an awesome conversation. And like we talked about, I think there might be a part 2 coming to this down the road. But for now, thank you so much for taking the time to chat through this with me. Again, everybody, Marcelo Carvalho, if you want to check out this book, which I've really enjoyed and really resonated with me, and I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people, it's called How to Beat Burnout with Gratitude, a simple guide to finding what really matters. You can grab it like I did on Amazon. But Marcelo, take us home here. If there's any place for people to find you, I know there's some supported resources to this book, so I'll let you take us home.
No, thanks for the opportunity, Robbie. It's always a pleasure talking to you. What I would say to people is that admitting that you are in a burnout stage, it takes courage. Despite what you may think that you are going to be showing your vulnerability, people are going to think you're weak. No, it actually takes a lot of courage to do that. So if you are going through this, if you know someone that are having those signs of burnout, what I would say, take the time, pause, seek help, and really focus on you and not what the society is imposing to you. The book's there as a reference, as a resource. We're gonna be spinning up our social media soon about this, but I would probably already give the handle right now. It's Beat Burnout on both Instagram and Facebook. On LinkedIn, you can find me over there. While I don't speak a lot about burnout, but there are some articles there that I'm starting to put, like the "Is not quiet quitting, is quiet coping." But thanks so much for having me, Robbie, and hope you have a great evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it soon. We'll talk to you, my friend.